Yes. I'm sorry. I was live without realizing it, and we're a minute late. I'm sorry. We were commiserating over the hurricanes of Florida. We do have children and grandchildren there, but it was just outside of the area where they live that was so bad. Turn to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. We're going to use Mark's rendition of the two miracles today because it says some things that John's account, which I usually go to, and we'll finish with some remarks in John chapter 6. We're looking at the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on water today. They're not new to us, so we can do them justice, I think. I want to read from a list that we've looked at individually as we began, using John's definition of sign, semeion. It's pointing to something else. So the event's pointing to God. It's not pointing you to the bread, to the water, to the man healed. It's pointing you to God. Changing of water into wine, we saw, was master of quality, and that's not surprising. Whatever God and Christ did, is the best that it can be. The healing of the nobleman's son was the master of distance or space. He didn't even have to go there. He just pronounced him healed. Healing of the impotent man was master of time. He had been unable to walk for 38 years, and Jesus healed him instantly. The feeding of the 5,000 is the healing, or the mastery over quantity. The numbers didn't matter. You know that he fed 4,000 and then 6,000. So this was multiplication that he did on two different occasions. The walking on water, we'll see also, was the master over natural law, and that's not surprising. He's the one that placed everything into their order, Genesis 1 and 2. Healing of the man born blind next week, master of misfortune, and certainly healing of, or the raising of Lazarus, the master of death. And we won't spend much time on Lazarus. We've been there before, but we will look at the man born blind probably next week. Let's look at Mark's account. He gives us just a few little caveats of information. John does too, but we probably don't look at Mark's account, and I want to see some of the things that are there. Mark 6:30, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. He'd sent them out on a limited commission. They had the ability to drive out demons. They were amazed with the things that they saw and heard. When they come back, in Mark's account, John the Baptist was beheaded. And so it's not chronological, but Mark placed it in that order. And then he comes and meets with them, and they share their experiences. Verse 31 is one of those caveats. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." And so it's just reminding us, having already had many occasions of healing and taking care of the needs of people. We looked at Mark Moore's chronology last week, and there's several times that is just a rendering of many would come, many opportunities for healing, for feeding, if you will. But this Mark just tells us he wanted time with them, and they needed time to get away from the circumstances of life. Let's find a quiet place. Let's get some rest. And they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw him recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Anticipating where they were going, the crowds found and followed them. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd of people, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. He had compassion because they were sheep without shepherd, the metaphor, but also he knew that they needed teaching. So I've numbered, I tend to do that in my 4 Gospels. There's 2 things given to us here. I had a conversation last weekend with someone, and he was surprised at what I told him. And then he understood it. Most ministers are introverts. We like people, but at some point we need to get away so that we can recharge. And the benefit is that, and he at first was surprised, and then I says, but think about the other side of the coin. Because many ministers are introverts, and we need to get away from people to recharge, we also don't mind sitting in an office behind a computer for many hours preparing the messages that we present. And I said, I know of 2 people who are very social in ministry. And they've spent very little time in private preparing their messages. I know one very social minister that would come to the office at 5 o'clock on Sunday morning preparing a message to deliver at 9 or 10 to the congregation that day. I wouldn't want to do that. I would never do that. But I would not want that kind of pressure. And of course, you're really not prepared. You're just not prepared. But we enjoy people, but the introvert in us, at some point, we've got to get to ourselves and recharge. That's how we are able to get our kinetic energy, if you will, back in place. But Jesus and the disciples may have been introverts, from what we're told, but also they'd been involved with people, been very busy, and they just needed time to rest. And that's a part of being an introvert, just needing time to rest from the energy of being with people. I shared that with this person because he said they are receiving resumes for those interested in perhaps preaching in their area. And one of them admitted in a phone interview that he really doesn't like people. And I said, well, is he introvert? He says, I don't think it's just that. And the way he shared it was the idea that he even would preach, and then when he would walk down the aisle after the invitation, he would go ahead and leave. That is really a social issue, if you will. But I understand part of it, but it apparently went way beyond that. Tommy?
Just a hiring person I talked to said, if you ever interview somebody and they say they're a people person, do not hire that person because they waste time in inner office gossip and talk.
Yeah.
If you find a person that says they're really not a people person,
Yeah.
hire them on the spot. They're productive, they want to sit and do their job.
Well, being social means that you've got to be out by not by yourself. You've got to be around people, and that's the way you are empowered, if you will. And you're really not very prepared when it's time to present messages. That at least has been my response. But they needed to get away, maybe introvert. I understand that, but that also needed to rest. We need to remember that they were not getting on cable cars motorized vehicles. They were walking. They were very manually involved in their travel, and so a lot of things would enter into that. But it does offer an opportunity for understanding people. He had compassion. When you see people, remember, he's going to tell us in a moment that they're following him for the wrong reason. They're wanting their bellies filled again. But he still would see people who knew of him, who had heard of him, probably bringing their own natural infirmities or bringing friends and family to him. It's hard to not do something when you can do something. And that's the way we feel when we have the opportunity to go help someone who doesn't have a minister and we're allowed to be away. It's hard not to be willing to do that. That's who I am. It's who we are. That's why we're here, by the way. The same trait would want us to consider leaving and coming here. But he saw them like sheep without a shepherd and in need of teaching. As we would change slightly how he began teaching, but he saw them and they needed the teaching that he could provide. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. I'm at Mark 6:35. This is a remote place. It's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Now, if your tendency is to find the negative, you're going to see that statement different than I do. Okay? What did they see? And what did they express when they said, it's late, they're hungry, they need to be dismissed, they need to be allowed to go somewhere to buy themselves something to eat? Is that a cavalier, I don't care about them? I hope you don't see that. Is that acknowledging that we care about them too? And they're going to need to eat? Sometimes we see the deeper concerns and what we would like for them to say, hey, you can heal people, do something. They didn't do that. I wish they had. If I'd been there, I probably would have said something similar. 6,000 men plus women and children. They need to be dismissed so they can go meet their physical need. And he said, Jesus, you give them something to eat. What would have gone through their mind? What would their faces have looked like? Looking at each other, did he really just say that? What does he mean? What does he expect us to do? We see it over and over and over. We would have said, we would have reacted the exact same way. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And he sets them up. I think it's a truism. He sets them up to learn a really big lesson. What has he just done to us? Has he just set us up to be open to a very big lesson? Skip some of these nuances and it wouldn't have had the same effect. Said nothing at all, just acted, wouldn't have had the same effect. He sets us up as well to think like him instead of being like them. And hopefully we are better at it in our day. Maybe not so much. Hopefully, yes. You give them something to eat. Philip, John tells us, Philip is the calculator guy. I can relate to that. I'm somewhat of a numbers person. My oldest son went into finance and accounting before he went into ministry, but he still uses all those things that he learned in working on half of a master's degree. A numbers person. Philip, John tells us, trying to put them in pockets to discern how many might have been there. And we have that ability. Let's see, there's about 50 there and 50 there, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 22 times 50 to get an idea. That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Give him credit for doing the math. What should he have done? If we'd been there, what do we look back? Hindsight's 20/20. What do we wish we had said? We have you. We will take care of it. We're asking you, deal with this. We have faith in you. Maybe we're doing better at that today. Probably not. We go through full days sometimes of expressing concern, grief. We found out Friday morning that our nephew was found dead by one of his sons. We think is probably related to things he should not have been involved in. We found out later in the day that a 24-year-old Christian young man who's doing domestic mission work through AIM, Sunset, and we've been sending a little bit of money to help him, was found in critical condition Wednesday night past Thursday. We heard about it Friday. We're thankful one was ready. We're sad that the other was not. We deal with it. We are compassionate in it. We celebrate. We mourn. Sometimes we don't go so quickly to give it to God. Be with those who are suffering loss in both of these circumstances. Learn lessons. Help us to learn the lessons and be sure others can learn those lessons. Well, 8 months' wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? A sarcastic statement, a condescending statement perhaps. I'd have to hear the tone, see the body language, but it's certainly being expressed to us. What can we do? How could we manage this in, 20 minutes? It's late. Night's coming. How could we, even if we could, how could we take care of this? Who's going to sell us the bread out here in this solitary place? We can think of all the things that might have gone through their mind. There's, I just remembered a hand, and then Lindita.
I was going to make a comment. I was wondering, where was Judas when
Yeah.
Jesus asked them to, you give him something?
Yeah. Lindita?
The note that I put in my Bible is our limited resources. And that's always our first thought. There's our limited resources. So we have God's all resources.
Yeah. Master of quantity. How limitless is his power. Just without limit. Mankind and human figuring doesn't enter into it. And yet we know that there would have been many, many days that he would have been people living meal to meal, certainly day to day, that could have enjoyed his help to eat a good meal. Simeon performs the act, not for the act of itself, but to point to God, to point to something else, someone else. And that's what we see. Jesus, again, in Mark's gospel, how many loaves do we have? John tells us that they went and found this food. How many loaves? Go and see. And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. I wonder, life group 2, I can't think of the word. I want to say noodles, pasta. Pasta theme. By the way, we brought garlic bread. You can't eat pasta without garlic bread. And how many can you feed? Ladies, several of our ladies went to Mariposa yesterday. They had more than expected, a taco meal, I think it was described. And some of them chose to eat less to be sure they had enough to feed the people there. It's the reality. People amount. People, 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, maybe would feed what? 3 people if they are generous to each other to eat a small amount. Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. And they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. And that's why I imagine in my mind that Philip probably divided them somehow into groups so it could give an intelligent answer, which was of no use. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. And most pictures show Jesus lifting the 5 loaves, 2 fish, and lifting it to God and giving thanks. Whether that's the way it happened, but that would fit Jewish culture. And he gave to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. Now, we know what's going to happen. How many of you who have been serving in a banquet setting would like to have more information? I would. We moved into a new building in South Florida a number of years ago, and we doubled in size in a year and a half. And we had 55 people move in and out every year, not to other congregations, but outside of South Florida. But we averaged about 400 people during those 9.5 years. We divided the congregation into 4 groups, and every Sunday, similar to our life group, we would have a group that would stay and provide a meal. Members, visitors, new members. We didn't even think about singles to single them out, pardon the pun, but we invited any and all people. And I believe the last Sunday that we were there, I was still fighting with some of them in charge of fellowships. Do you know what I'm about to say? 80 people every Sunday during the school year being fed, and they had 1 table instead of 2 that you could go down both sides. And the individual in charge would say, well, there's some food on one that's not on the other. And if it's 1 table, even though it took 30 minutes to serve, we wanted to let them have a choice of all the food. Now, I'm going to not say much more because it's being videoed, and Terry is really concerned about me right now. Why is it at fellowships we don't know how to serve large people quickly? Jesus gives it to them orderly, and he serves them in an orderly way. I'm sure it didn't take 4 hours. It could have, if they'd chosen to do it in a, I won't say any more. Yep, I'm looking for verse 42. Chami?
We do have one small problem with our fellowships here, actually 2. First one is, when we see people that have mobility issues, we should be serving them.
Yeah.
Not make them go through the line. Basically go see what is available and serve them. The second thing is, you've already brought this up several
Yeah, and there's
A lot, and we're doing better.
there's reasoning behind both things. If you're not concerned, if you have enough, controlling the portions is one reason that you would serve them. But why do we want to take 20 minutes when we can serve in 10 and sit down and be in fellowship sooner? Again, it's opinion. It's opinion. But let's get to 42. They all ate. Mark and others tell us that. And they were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. Plenty, plenty, and leftovers. Thank you, by the way, Pat, for the 3 chili dogs left over from last Sunday. I really enjoyed them Sunday night when we got home, and Monday night watching a terrible football game. I really like chili dogs and chili slaw dogs. And she was nice enough to provide me with some leftovers of something I really didn't want to miss. And the number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Women and children could easily, probably was over 15,000, but we're only guessing. We do have a number to work from. Watch the message. Mastery over quantity. What would you like for them to have learned in the midst of this? Sharing. Uh-huh. Don't leave Jesus out of the equation. Look at what Mark tells us in verse 52. Immediately, a storm, he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." He climbed into the boat with them. The wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they did not understand about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Don't you get it? It's me. It's me. If you didn't get it then, maybe you will get it now. It's me. And who is me, the creator of heaven and earth? As the Logos, the one who had already performed multitude of miracles, teros, samion, and I've lost the last word, the wonders. I'll think of it in a minute. And all of those opportunities, it just did not ever really quickly come to their mind that this is Jesus. He tells them in John 6 that in order to follow me, you've got to eat of my flesh, drink of my blood. From that time forward, John 6:66, many disciples no longer followed him. They wanted a meal. They were there only for what he could provide to fill their stomach on that day, willing to come back for another meal, not because of a commitment, not because of change of mind or heart, not due to an understanding of a change of culture or character that would be needed. It's just the physical. Now, I've had to admit it in public twice. Now is the third time others will see it. As a college student, we attended one of 2 universities regularly off the MTSU campus, one across the street, one less than a half mile away. And when on Sunday night they would have a potluck or sandwich fellowship for, quote, all the college students, we would go to whoever was providing food. That's why they did it. They wanted us to come. They wanted to provide those things for us. But at some point, how about coming back and worshiping with us? How about letting us get to know you in a different setting? How about, and the list could have been very long. We do things to open doors and hopefully have meaningful relationships. That's not being condemned here, but he's revealing to us, Mark and in the other text, he's revealing to us humanity and why sometimes it stays superficial. The physical sometimes does not get to the spiritual application. And he's telling us that. Turn to John 6. I've alluded to it briefly. You know, if you've studied John, that he includes many things not in the other Gospels. And some would ask, why does John, with the other Gospels, cover the feeding of the 5,000? All of them cover it. And the reason is because of what John gives us beginning in John 6, verse 25. And it's one of the most deeply spiritual statements of the ministry of Jesus, applied based upon the feeding of 5,000. I am the bread of life. And if you drink of me or eat of me, in other passages, the two things, you'll never thirst again, you'll never be hungry again. Spiritual applications. And very strong stuff. Verse 34, sir, from now on, give us this bread. As he's chiding the religious leaders and some followers, as he brings up Moses providing manna from heaven, and they say, well, give us some of this, like Moses gave. And he said, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me and still do not believe. John gives us the longer discourse that was given during this time that the others do not. We are blessed to have John's commentary, to have what he had, what they heard, and the messages there. And
Also in John chapter 6, verse 14, it says that the people saw the sign Jesus performed. They began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. So they understood, but it seems like the apostles did not.
yeah, they were definitely slow of learning. And some of them did not. It's an acknowledgement here of some of the people at least, because John 6:66 was not talking about the 12, it's talking about many learners. Mathatos, it's many learners on that occasion, not the disciples literally, but many learners no longer followed him. You can't deny what you just saw. And you can't deny the fact that I just had a satisfying meal and I saw them picking up leftovers. Where did it come from? Did they know where it came from? We don't know what they know. We don't know completely what they understood from the story. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Did they know that? But they knew there were many away from stores, late at night, everyone hungry, and your need was met. More so. More so. Marion?
Not to mention, they didn't have speakers, so word had to travel if it got to some of the people actually having food.
Yeah. Why did John cover it? Just start reading from verse 25 through the end of the chapter. It was a teachable moment that John shared with us. Deeply, deeply profound stuff. John was the more spiritual-minded of all the writers, and that only means that he gave us insights. He gave us instruction and application that the others did not. And that wasn't their purpose. Mark wrote to Gentiles. It wasn't his purpose to talk about Moses and manna from heaven in the wilderness. Gentiles would not have wanted or needed that. But John knew that we would. Let's go back to Mark 6 rather. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd, and after leaving them, he went into the hills to pray. Jesus needed time away from people. And when evening came, the boat was in the, and he needed to spend time with his Father. Let's not forget the obvious. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake. He was alone on land. I have not circled that. I'm going to take out my pen right now and circle it. It's helping to make my point. He finally was able to be alone. And he saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he went out to them walking on the lake. And he was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. And they cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Now, I know a youth minister that insisted that because the word ghost is in the Bible in this translation, that there really is such a thing as ghost. And I had to spend a great deal of time explaining to my 3 teenagers that this doesn't offer that proof. It's telling us what they thought. It's not a proof. And they refused to listen to me, choosing to believe the youth minister. With time, they came to understand it. Mark is simply telling us what they thought, and it terrified them. And immediately, the implication is, and remember, Mark goes quickly from person to person, event to event, and even situational things. As soon as they were terrified, he seems to be telling us, immediately he said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." You're not seeing a ghost. He didn't say that. He said, "It's me. Don't be afraid. It's me." And he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. And they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. I have written down John 6:25. So let me turn back there and see why I wrote it down. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" And so John continues the discussion from the lake after the walking on water. And from verse 21, the next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but they had gone away. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats, went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. I give them much credit. I give them much credit. I would have been there, I'm certain. There's some things we can't be certain of. I think hopefully we would all say, I would have been there with him. I would want to be with that man. Because of a meal? Maybe. Some were. Because of what he'd done? Maybe. For friends and family. Healed sick. Taken care of diseases. I'm thankful that the multitudes were trying to figure out, where is he? Why isn't he here? Where could he have gone? Oh, yeah, let's go. It was a problem-solving life that they were about. And they found him on the other side of the lake. And they asked, "How did you get here? How did you get here?" This is different. different story, if you will, from the details of Mark. Jesus walking on water, and Peter wants to come out to him. That's another detail that Mark doesn't give us. But Jesus saw them. Let me ask this question. I hadn't thought about it. When he saw the multitudes late at night, away from home, hungry, saw them as sheep without shepherds and in need of teaching, what did he see in the disciples? In a boat, a storm had come up, and they were rowing, straining at the rows. The wind was against them. The implication from Mark is that they would have had trouble reaching land. Isn't it normal that Jesus would do for them what he could, knowing their state of mind? We need to see him that way. My goal, studying miracles and looking at the upper room discourse, is that we fall in love with Jesus all over again. Just fall in love with him again. This is one of those times. This is one of those times. It's easy to say, let's talk about the sinners in need of a Savior, the ones who haven't had the opportunity. They haven't turned down many opportunities. Let's give them and do what we can. But I'm not doing this again for unfaithful Christians or members of the body that know better. They've made so many mistakes. Why waste our time? Jesus saw disciples, and they were terrified, and he did what he could do. It makes me love him again and again. And he does that for us. He wants us to think that way. They saw him. Had he ever walked on water before? Apparently not, is the implication. They were terrified. If he'd been out there before, you would think that they would, hey, he's doing it again. Yeah, he's doing it again. And he's caring about us. And he's wanting to provide that which we can't provide for ourselves. Who knows? But he responded to them. And he showed power over nature. Power over nature. Immediately. And he has done this before. Lindita? Yep.
To me, that's even more significant because it's so that, okay, you are tired and you are, maybe my motherly point of view.
Right.
Just taking care like mother, it's time for you now after all you've done to take, a rest and be regenerate.
Yeah.
Again. And that's so touching. Showing another facet of Jesus that he cares for his disciples, not only for their distress.
Yeah. The mother spoke as a mother and related what Jesus did when they had been out, and they came and reported all that they'd said and done. And he said, let's find a quiet place and let's rest. It was showing concern for them. He was like a mother who takes care of tired little babies. And you may have to spank them a little bit to tell them to finally get in there. Do you have children like one of ours who would fight? Terry's warning me here. Who would fight desperately to ever want to be at home and ever want to slow down one instant, but if he ever had to stay in his room, he would be there and get involved in some pretty neat things. If he's forced there, he really enjoyed it. And he made wonderful things while forced to be in his room. Jesus was caring for them. Wanted them to have a chance to rest. They had accomplished much in the realm of spiritual, but affected the physical. I notice the time has come and gone. Let's go to John 9 next week, healing of the man born blind, as we begin, and then we'll head out into other areas.